Hey everyone, by now most of you have watched the circus sideshow that was my live debate with James Tour about whether we are clueless on the origin of life. If you haven't seen it yet, this was the general vibe.
You don't have enzymes! Show us the data! Origin of life research is a scam!
Fully replicated.
It is not fully replicated, no way! Zero!
Of the thousands of comments posted, I think this one summarizes it best. James Tour debate tactics. 1. Draw some chemistry mechanism on the blackboard that nobody asked for and doesn't explain anything. 2. Point the chalk at Dave and scream at him to do something with it, whatever that is. 3. When Dave shows recent scientific literature disproving you, just scream that he didn't do something with your blackboard diagram. 4. Write clueless beside each of your pre-written topics like you were going to do anyway, no matter what Dave said. 5. Did I forget screaming? Make sure to tack on the screaming. This last one was especially ironic given that James was desperately trying to avoid open discussion when we were setting up the debate because, and I quote, "I do not trust that you will permit me to speak."
And it's just
Show us!
hand
Right here!
I
Here.
just showed you.
Do it!
About it.
You
and
just said
don't
homochirality.
show
Oh,
any
there's the
of
word.
this. And I'm showing you another paper.
Mr.
where Founder got
Farina!
it.
Here!
What
go,
do you
go,
want me-
Go! 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 You don't do it!
So clearly, James acted like an unhinged maniac, which made good faith discussion impossible. So for those who are unfamiliar with the research, let's go through some key points and get some more clarity, shall we? So James began his parade of dishonesty right at the beginning of his opening statement by attempting to reframe the topic of debate in a dishonest way. He knows that the idea that we are clueless about the origin of life is totally indefensible, so he had to change the narrative immediately, which he did by pretending that if we can't show experimentally how to get from tiny molecules to a living cell, we are then clueless about the entire process. This is like saying that if we aren't ready to convict the killer, we must not have a single clue as to who it was. Which is stupid. But hey, at least he said we only need RNA and not DNA, like he's claimed in all of his content, so it looks like James finally learned at least one thing from me. Now, before diving in, one thing must be made perfectly clear. Anyone who accused me of using ad hominem attacks has no idea what they're talking about. Ad hominem is a logical fallacy whereby someone makes an argument based on irrelevant characteristics of an opponent. Calling James a liar is not irrelevant because he objectively lies about the topic we were debating. I showed very clearly in all of my videos and in the debate how he lies, misquotes people, distorts information, and in general has zero integrity in approaching this topic. So he is a liar and a fraud. If someone is convicted of stealing, they are a thief. If someone is convicted of murder, they are a murderer. Referring to someone who has murdered as a murderer is not ad hominem. It's what they are. James is a liar. End of story. If I had presented James as a thief, or a misogynist, or bad father, or anything like that, that would be ad hominem, because it is not pertinent. I didn't do that once. I showed how he objectively lies about all the science related to this topic, and he therefore does not deserve the respect that would be granted to an opponent arguing in good faith. Period. James, on the other hand, has committed plenty of ad hominem attacks on me, showing clips of me in music videos, presenting me as a goofy clown who shouldn't be taken seriously, instead of engaging with the science I've been presenting to him for 2 years now. So anyone who accuses me of ad hominem is a hypocrite and should be dismissed at face value. Got it? Okay, on to the opening statements. And what would a James Tour opening statement be without some quote mining? Let's start with what he says about Jack Szostak.
Professor Jack Szostak, then at Harvard, now at the University of Chicago, said in 2014 that he'd create life in his lab in 3 to 5 years. He did not.
Jack claimed in 2014 that he could get a protocell in 3 to 5 years. Did it happen? No, so we are clueless. Well, let's see what he meant in this Huffington Post article. Oh, he meant that given the building blocks in abundance, it could be done, because Jack was specifically referring to protocell assembly, and not the synthetic chemistry that other members of the community are working on. So, that is a misrepresentation. Then he quote mines him again to pretend that autocatalytic sets don't exist.
Jack Szostak now says that aside from nature's construct of RNA, invoking of, quote, autocatalytic sets was never chemically realistic, unquote. Hence, the prebiotic relevance of autocatalytic sets crumbles.
Wow, I guess all of these papers and reviews on autocatalytic sets aren't real because Jack said so. But did he? From the same article. If you read, you immediately see that he was talking about something very specific and the semantics of how this term is defined. When origin of life researchers disagree about the nuance surrounding hypotheses within their field, James pretends they are saying origin of life research is nonsense. Another instance of James trying to hand-wave away an entire field of science he doesn't like, while having the audacity to pretend that it's a member of that field who's doing the hand-waving. But as James says, no need to waste our time tonight on autocatalysis. Please, Dave, please don't bring up autocatalysis.
So, no need to waste our time tonight on autocatalysis.
And of course, the biggest and most nefarious quote mine of all, a tweet from Origin of Life researcher Lee Cronin, where he facetiously called Origin of Life research a scam. Here is James insisting this is proof that the field is full of corruption and hype, and he is totally vindicated in exposing it, because they admit it themselves.
My opponent's favorite Origin of Life expert, Professor Lee Cronin, now writes and says on multiple occasions that, quote, Origin of Life research is a scam, unquote. And, quote, there are lots of layers to the scam, unquote. A scam means a dishonest scheme or a fraud. It's beautiful. It's as if Professor Lee Cronin has been scientifically born again.
Of course, the idea that an Origin of Life researcher would be admitting that his entire body of work is fraudulent is totally idiotic, and any rational viewer can surmise that this tweet is a joke with zero further context. Still, one can find this further context by Googling for 10 seconds. Here is Lee explaining to podcaster Lex Fridman what he meant.
Origin of Life research is a scam. So if this is Shakespeare, can we analyze this word? Why is the Origin of Life research a scam? Aren't you kind of doing Origin of Life research?
Okay, it was tongue in cheek, but yeah, I think, and I meant it as tongue in cheek. I'm not doing the Origin of Life research. I'm trying to make artificial life. And I also want to bound the likelihood of the origin of life on Earth, but more importantly, to find origin of life elsewhere. But let me directly address the tweet. There are many, many good chemists out there doing origin of life research, but I want to nudge them, and I think they're brilliant. There's no question. The chemistry they are doing, their motivation is great. So what I meant by that tweet is saying that maybe they're making assumptions about saying if only I could make this particular type of molecule, say this RNA molecule, or this phosphodiester, or this other molecule, it's going to somehow unlock the origin of life. And I think that Origin of Life has been looking at this for a very long time. And whilst I think it's brilliant to work out how you can get to those molecules, I think that chemistry and chemists doing Origin of Life could be nudged into doing something even more profound.
Big surprise! For the full conversation, visit the interview linked below. Lee is saying that the creation of artificial life is more interesting to him than getting a precise historical model of how life arose on Earth. As you can see, James really shows his true colors immediately with this stunt. He is freely admitting that he has zero interest in truth, zero interest in a good faith conversation, and that it's all one big fat act to keep his followers on the leash. But that's the way he chose to play it, and now that he's all queued up to perform his ridiculous pageantry at the blackboard, let's get to his prompts. James decided to kick things off by drawing some amino acids on the board. The only purpose of this was to posture as the wise professor for his followers, who are impressed by someone drawing an amino acid, something that undergraduate freshmen can do. And he didn't even do it right. He labels the first one asp and later calls it asparagine instead of aspartic acid.
This is called asparagine.
This is not isolated. He's made similar errors in his content, which demonstrates how far out of his element he is when talking about this topic.
Less than 1% of the mixed asparagine.
This pathetic stunt was the centerpiece of his performance for two reasons. First, it allowed him to deny all of the research I showed him because he decided that it didn't count unless I could write something with chalk. And second, he planned from the beginning to arbitrarily write clueless beside every prompt whenever he felt like it and declare himself the winner. Let's make something perfectly clear. There was literally no reason for either of us to write anything with chalk. We were discussing origin of life research, which is reported in the primary scientific literature. The point was to look at the research I had supplied James that he had been ignoring. Every time James asked me to draw prebiotic synthetic pathways with chalk, this is what he was asking for, something like this. Not only is it impossible to draw this on the board in the short amount of time we had for each prompt, it is absolutely pointless, since I can and did show the research that had these schemes in them. Copying them down with chalk does not enhance their validity, and anyone who thinks I should have written anything with chalk fell for a dumb stunt. End of story. For anyone pretending I can't draw structures on the board, go watch my organic chemistry tutorials to see that I can indeed draw complex structures and even name them correctly, unlike James. Anyway, the reason James wrote these specific amino acids with anionic and cationic side chains respectively is because he knows that he has been completely wrong in pretending there are no prebiotically plausible methods of aqueous peptide synthesis, which he has claimed consistently in all of his content, despite all of the references I've repeatedly been showing him. So here he is silently conceding something that he fiercely denied over 2 years of content because he knows it's indefensible.
You're going to do condensation reactions in water? I don't understand why some would suggest that you do condensation reactions in an ocean like this, in water. How can that be? Tell me about that. How do you do condensation reactions in water? Have you any references on these claims?
The papers I brought for this topic demonstrate what I had been saying in my content, that chemical activators make this chemistry possible, and there are plenty of prebiotically relevant ones, which have been verified experimentally, which he would have learned 2 years ago if he had actually bothered to check the literature. But James knows he's absolutely screwed here, so he has to pretend that he never said anything like that, which he does by immediately shifting the goalposts and complaining about potential reactions from side chains that would interfere with peptide formation, blissfully unaware that this too has been addressed.
Here's the scheme. You want to go through that?
But
Aqueous, room temperature, you get oligopeptides. Okay, and it jumps to 80% yield with prebiotic oxidizing agents like
not
potassium
with
ferricyanide.
this, because what happens is this would participate, this would
Oh,
participate.
you want to do the side chain thing. Okay, well, we've got research for that too.
Of course, I'm speaking to the side chain.
So I showed him a couple papers where site-selective coupling is done using residues with these specific side chains. First, this one.
That sulfur compound was made separately in dichloromethane using HOBT, which is a coupling agent designed by human beings for solid phase synthesis. That's how they made the
Are you saying
thiol.
sulfur is not available prebiotically?
So James claims it's not prebiotically relevant and lies about a reagent, HOBT. Here is the scheme. Nothing about HOBT. Just a capped peptide, the thioamino acid, and iron 2. Thus, a completely plausible prebiotic pathway for polymerization of amino acids. And here are other figures showing how much effort was done to focus on lysine specifically, as that is the most problematic side chain due to its nucleophilicity. HOBT was used to prepare a reagent, not for the actual prebiotic research. You decide whether James is dishonest or just can't read the paper properly. Now, to be clear, once again, this scheme is what James wanted me to write on the board. Or actually more than this, as I would have had to write the relevant reagents over every arrow. I'll concede that it would have been great to have a slide with this scheme ready to go, but again, I had no idea what he would complain about, what science he would deny, or which papers he would lie about, which made it essentially impossible to predict which schemes I should have ready to display. At any rate, here it is now for all to see, and as for James claiming that the study is not prebiotically relevant, that's totally idiotic. Here are passages highlighted that specifically discuss its prebiotic relevance, which is not hard to swallow since we are talking about simple sulfur-containing compounds, which have always been abundant, especially on the Hadean Earth. Here's another reference from Ashkenazi where glutamic acid couples selectively at the alpha amino group. I won't go into detail to keep things brief, but it's linked below. Then we get to the Powner paper, which we spent some time on, which also achieves this for all proteinogenic side chains.
He got coupling with lysine, regioselective lysine ligation, the most selective peptide ligation that tolerates all proteinogenic side chains.
But
he did this
does not
with
do
all side
an
chains.
amino acid coupling. He's got
What are you talking about? Prebiotic catalytic peptide ligation.
There's no amino acids there.
Yes, it's amino acids.
Okay,
What are you
go
talking
to the
about?
equation of that. Go to the equation of
I don't
that.
have that one, but you're just lying.
Again, since I had to be ready to talk about roughly 100 papers, I didn't have screenshots of every scheme in every paper, or the slideshow would be impossible to navigate. So when James was shouting for me to show data, I perhaps should have exited the slideshow and searched for the paper on my computer, but with so little time available, it seemed imprudent. Anyway, here are the schemes now. Powner got ligation with all amino acids, without side chain participation, and with no protecting groups. James complaining that it proceeds via a nitrile intermediate is idiotic. That's the mechanism. That's the reason it's site selective, and it is prebiotically plausible. Shifted goalposts obliterated. I also want to point out something else, since all of his fans whine about me referring to headlines of papers, also known as titles, since this is not a newspaper. Primary scientific literature uses titles that efficiently convey the contents of the paper. Look at the title of this one. Prebiotic catalytic peptide ligation yields proteinogenic peptides by intramolecular amide-catalyzed hydrolysis, facilitating regioselective lysine ligation in neutral water. I repeat, regioselective lysine ligation, meaning that lysine did not react at the side chain despite being unprotected. The title alone proves James wrong, no matter how badly his fans want to cram a wedge in to leave room for James to lie about the paper so they can reject it for no reason. If people don't know what these words mean, that's their problem. The titles and abstracts are not lies and clickbait. They indeed accurately convey what is accomplished in the research. Then, after Jim's first prompt, the moderator decided he wanted to try and correct me for the first of 3 times, and he was wrong every time. Here he is trying to comment on the 13C NMR spectrum that James fumbled in his content, where I pointed out that he foolishly compared the spectrum of ribose borate to that of pure ribose.
I just have one quick comment going back to the NMR, and that is, when organic chemists run NMRs, they typically don't run them with boric acid present. If you're going to run a C13 NMR of ribose, you want the ribose to be as pure as it can possibly be.
The moderator had no idea what I was talking about and was unaware of the fact that Benner's experiment specifically involved reaction on borate mineral surfaces, which is why it was ribose borate, even though I specifically gave that context.
But he was doing chemistry on borate minerals. That's why it was ribose borate.
So now it's your turn.
I corrected him, he probably felt embarrassed, and just moved on like nothing had happened. This was clearly an unnecessary intervention aimed at making it appear as though I was being discredited, and it failed miserably. For my first prompt, I confronted James with 3 of the most glaring lies he has been telling. For brevity, I won't repeat them in full, but we can point out that James did nothing but squirm and sweat for this entire section, refusing to admit that he lied, even though I proved it using direct quotes. I asked why he lists textbooks that say this dumb thing when they absolutely don't say that. He can't provide any evidence that they say these things, so without any excuse for his behavior, he immediately turns to his Blackboard stunt and writes clueless next to polypeptides to distract the audience.
Okay, so there is a primordial soup model, and there is no understanding of what's happening in this primordial soup. And you talk to people, and this is exactly what they see. They talk about the primordial soup model in all of these textbooks. That's your question.
This is the primordial soup model. It just means some molecules in water. That's what it means.
Look, you were absolutely clueless on
James.
polypeptides. You never gave me the coupling for that reaction. I want you to notice
how transparent. Then he says, "This is my time now," like a child, as though we aren't in an open discussion section, and begins shouting.
I'm going to narrate. This is my time
James.
now. I want you to notice he didn't answer the question. I invited him to come up to show me the chemistry, how this is done.
No,
He did not. He did not. And now you want me to say...
I ask again for him to show me a textbook that says anything like what he claims, given that I have shown sections of college-level textbooks showing the opposite of what he claims. He can't do it.
I said right there, it says miniature C, prebiotic soup. Those are quotes from each one of those
do they
books.
show
is in there.
molecules forming a slithering creature? No, they don't, because that's a lie.
Then the claim that there are only a dozen people working in the field. He just tries to deny his own quote.
Does that look like a dozen people to you?
What I meant by that, the number of people that are doing the complex organic Sutherland Pounder type synthesis. This is exactly what Benner told you.
No.
Benner told you
People
that
all
it's
over
a
the world.
very
Benner
small.
told me. I have
No,
hundreds
Benner
of papers.
told you on the video that there's a small number of people that are still doing the Sutherland type of complex synthesis. He says most of the area is
Origin of
not
Life
doing that
community is a
anymore.
boutique community. It's a small number of people. It's a dozen people.
It was in
That's what you
reference
said.
to the number of people that are doing the complex Sutherland type synthesis.
The Origin of Life community. The Origin of Life community. You're talking about the field in general.
Then the Bruce thing, more shouting and denying reality.
This was pretty dumb, right? He just took one of the guy's videos and stuck it in.
Because when I
Why'd you do that?
contacted Bruce, Bruce said to me, "I don't even know what you're talking about. I was unaware of
Dave
this."
asked me
he
to
said
comment
it in
on
the email.
some of your
You're not
writings,
showing the whole email.
and specifically about what we are doing. And does this show?
No, why don't you show the page? Why don't you
wrong?
show the page where he said, "I
Does
had
this
no
show
idea that
prove
this
you
is
wrong?
there." Look, I published the whole email.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
you're only
here
showing
he
the one.
says that I asked for the
No, but
video,
in-
and he's talking about you. And then here you go.
No,
and
you don't want to show the one where
just
he
took
said,
one of the guy's videos
"I
and
had
stuck
no
it in.
idea."
I think he should
You're
apologize.
not
for this.
going to address anything on life.
This was pretty. This was a pretty dumb
Let's
lie.
try
This
to
was
have
a really malicious
dialogue
lie.
instead of people shouting at each other. So maybe take turns.
I think an apology is in order for this lie, James. Pretty dumb lie. Pretty dumb lie to tell.
Then he pivots to the Shostak thing. He refuses to admit he was wrong for referring to this as primary literature, even though I am showing the web article with full-page illustrations and no data whatsoever.
Very
Why'd
good
you say
conversation.
this was a
you
Nature
totally made that up. Because if you had spoken to Jack Sostek, nobody made me apologize to him. I offered him my apology,
Let me
and
show
he
you
accepted
the primary literature, the journal Nature.
And I
Does this look like the
apologized
journal
to
Nature?
him.
And but you continue to call his work utterly, no, what did you call it? Ridiculous, utterly ridiculous. About these
it is
structures, right?
utterly ridiculous.
Yeah.
He has the balls to insist that Jack somehow agrees with him.
No,
Correct.
Jack agrees with me. That was poorly done. There's no stereochemistry on
So
that sugar. When
It's
there's
an
no
article for ladies.
stereochemistry,
Okay, I'm gonna
it's not
call-
ribose.
Let's be completely clear. This is what narcissists do. James is a compulsive liar and will not admit to his lies ever. But because I exposed these 3 lies so clearly and undeniably in front of a live audience, and because he knew he could not justify them, he got very agitated. And this is the point after which James really started to ramp up the volume as a coping mechanism for being so thoroughly exposed. On to Jim's second prompt, where again he takes to the chalkboard for absolutely no reason, and once again, just like the amino acid side chains, he shifts the goalposts to talk about the nucleotide linkages, because he knows his claims that polynucleotides have never been made prebiotically is totally indefensible.
Such that you get coupling between the 3' hydroxyl to this 5' site. So you need 3', 5' coupling, to the exclusion of 2', 5' coupling, to the exclusion of branching. Every article that you cited in your videos, every article that you could ever cite that shows this coupling, shows this scrambling, you get significant amounts of 2', significant amount of branching. And that's why this chemistry doesn't work.
To those who are confused, ribonucleotides can polymerize via the 2' or 3' hydroxyl. And in absence of enzymes, you do get a mixture of these linkages, whereas the RNA we observe in life goes exclusively via the 3' hydroxyl. So to James, we can't get RNA prebiotically. But despite his wishful thinking, just like with the amino acid side chains, his objection has been addressed by dozens of papers he never bothered to search for. And I brought up just one by his nemesis, Jack Szostak.
I asked you for 3,5, which is what you need to have life.
Want to do me a favor here? I want you to read the title of that paper there. It's by your buddy, Jack Szostak. He's done some research on this.
Yeah, I know. And Jack Szostak even says he cannot get it.
James doesn't know anything about this paper and throws out a random figure of 30 to 70% wrong linkages, presumably claiming that nucleotide polymerization on catalytic surfaces gives that amount of 2' to 5' linkages.
How much tolerance? How much? Montmorillonite clay is 30 to 70%.
It does not. 3' linkage is predominant. Additionally, 2' to 3' migration has been observed as equilibrium favors natural RNA strands. Also, 5' 2' linkages hydrolyze faster than 5' 3', effectively purging RNA constructs of the wrong linkages. But as he runs with this baseless claim, I have to try and find a slide or a note that contradicts his lie, which I couldn't do on the spot, and his fans applaud the lie.
His amount of 2,5 to 3,5 is not 30 to 70%. If you have a 0.1%, you're okay, because you'll have runs, but not 30 to 70%. Show me the amount. And what about branching?
My God.
It's not there.
This is why the position presenting the truth will always be at the disadvantage compared with the position willing to lie. Well, for those who are actually interested in science, I can show the paper now. Szostak ran trials with randomized contents of 10, 25, and 50% 5' 2' linkages. When studying ribozymes with 10% wrong linkages, catalytic function was retained and in some cases exhibited accelerated replication due to easier thermal strand separation, which is crucial for the replication process. Multiple times, people complained that I couldn't recall what type of function was being examined. So let's state now that he looked at an aptamer that binds ATP and a hammerhead ribozyme with a variety of catalytic properties. Yes, it would have been better if I had memorized such details for all 100 papers we might have discussed. Yes, it would have been wonderful if Jack Szostak himself was there to answer these questions about his own research. Unfortunately, I'm not a computer and Jack wasn't there, but that I couldn't remember the details doesn't make the research any less valid, and this is not the only paper that demonstrates these principles. The ribozymes were functional, as in having catalytic function, as in the heterogeneity in nucleotide linkages still results in ribozymes with catalytic activity, suggesting that the problem James posed is not insurmountable. All James had to do was search the literature, and he didn't do it. Continuing, James tries to extrapolate this toward pretending that no one has made RNA at all, regardless of linkage.
Without an enzyme, it has never been done.
You are completely clueless.
It's over. Has been done. It's over. You can't make RNA, there's no life. You can't make RNA, there is no life.
As though heterogeneity of linkage makes the RNA somehow not even qualify as RNA. So I again refer to the absolute common knowledge that RNA has been formed prebiotically for decades, and his fans proceed to boo me.
Nucleotide polymerization has been demonstrated for decades on clay. You are literally pulling this out of your ass. This has been done for decades.
It continues like this until James writes clueless next to polynucleotides, even though we've just been discussing many different ways to get polynucleotides. He says it's over, and his flock cheers.
I said,
Still
show me the
recognition
chemistry.
and catalytic
He
function.
did not.
I mean, you
Done.
can say that.
Done. You can't do this, you can't make
You
a
can
cell.
say
You
that,
can't
you
do
can
that,
cheer,
you can't make
but
a cell.
you're just
It's
lying.
over, buddy. It's over.
Well, for some more insight, I asked Dave Deamer for a comment, which he provided in the form of a note briefly summarizing some facts about this field, in which he is one of the world's top researchers. He goes all the way back to the 1980s to discuss the first RNA synthesis using a template but without enzymes, then over to 2006 and the first RNA synthesis without any template but using catalytic clay surfaces, then to some of Shostak's work regarding protocells, and then Deamer's own work involving polymerization of monomers without activation via wet-dry cycling in prebiotic analog conditions at Yellowstone. RNA made without activation, without human intervention, in a hot spring. Any thoughts on that, James? Are you going to stick with clueless on polynucleotides? Are you going to expose Dave Deamer now? You kind of have to.
Any other researcher that goes on this Dave Farina's program, I'm going right after them. I'm going to expose their work. Whoever goes on his channel, their work will be exposed.
That James can flat out deny decades of research and his fans just clap and cheer is nauseating. It is a stunning display of his profound dishonesty and his utter disinterest in good faith conversation regarding this topic. He was there exclusively to give off the illusion of being correct and maintain his flock, no matter what he had to say and no matter how many lies he had to tell in order to achieve that result. Of course, the moderator decided to jump in again to demonstrate his incompetence about the function of ribozymes, and said that functional RNA had to either be messenger RNA or ribosomal RNA, and was presumably going to say transfer RNA third, which are all functions of RNA in modern cells, demonstrating that he was not following anything we were talking about and just wanted to chime in for no reason. And then when I corrected him for saying this dumb thing, the peanut gallery moaned in complete shock.
To have functional RNA, it has to do at least three things. It has to serve as messenger RNA, ribosomal RNA, and
messenger RNA. You're talking about features of modern cells. We're talking about prebiotic.
Oh, the audacity! Another stunt rigged for James. This led to my next prompt as I continued to describe all the research James ignores, and he just whined about zwitterions and chemical activation.
This is not just water, it has activation. Once you activate, it is not amino acids polymerizing in water. As soon as you activate, it goes from being zwitterionic, to being not zwitterionic. It functionalizes on the carboxylic acid. That proton gets freed up. That proton gets freed up on the amine, and then it can do the attack.
You're describing
wait, I'm not done. I'm not done. This is my section. Let me get done here.
This is us talking together.
Phenylalanine, and serine.
Again, to be clear, this is totally idiotic. These papers show prebiotic peptide bond formation. The prebiotic chemical activators are what allow the chemistry to happen. He is complaining that the amino acids don't just magically condense without activation, as though anyone ever said that's what they should do. Chemical activation is what makes these transformations kinetically favorable despite the thermodynamic barrier, and I showed many papers that do this under prebiotic conditions. He is rambling like a lunatic. Then at one point he realizes how bad this is looking for him, and he starts flipping out about the chalkboard. Not a good look.
Right? You're just shifting the goalposts about lysine, and I'm showing you another paper.
Mr. Farina! Here!
What do you want me?
Go! You don't do it! You just talk!
Maybe for some additional clarity, we can consult another expert here. How about Loren Dean Williams, an origin of life researcher over at Georgia Tech? What does he have to say about where we're at in terms of prebiotically plausible synthetic pathways to these molecules?
What is your view in terms of the status of the field with prebiotically plausible synthetic pathways to get to, say, polypeptides and polynucleotides?
Okay, those are two different stories. Polypeptides, it's a pretty clean story. You know, you can make amino acids very easily by prebiotic methods. They're raining down on our heads from outer space, and we now have this wet-dry chemistry to polymerize them, oligomerize them. So we can, there's very plausible prebiotic mechanisms that are very easy to do to get to, you know, they're not proteins or anything like that, but they are short. Oligomers are short, and they are not exactly clean. They have some mixture of peptide and ester and some other things, but it's amazingly close considering the very simple, easy chemistry you can do to get to them. We don't know where RNA came from. Maybe it came from direct chemical synthesis on the ancient Earth, or maybe it's a product of chemical evolution, meaning, in an evolution can make new things. We think chemical evolution can make molecules that were not there originally on sort of the ancient prebiotic Earth.
You mean like something else was produced, like short oligopeptides that had catalytic activity?
Yes, we think catalysis is part of it. One of the things that we think is very important is actually sort of selection on the basis of persistence. We call things that live longer win. Even in biology, this is true. But so the idea is that peptides are great at assembling. That's what a beta sheet is, et cetera. They're assemblies are resistant to degradation. So if you can just by any random process make molecules that assemble, then their population will rise because they degrade very, very slowly. This is true. It doesn't matter whether it's RNA or DNA or protein or any kind of molecule. Once you assemble it, it becomes resistant to degradation. So we think in early chemical evolution, selection was really on the basis of protection from degradation.
Mm-hmm. So it's just basic statistical dynamics, essentially. What about something I've tried to learn about is even further protection from degradation by interaction with mineral surfaces or things like that?
Yes. Any kind of assembly. In fact, if you just take anything and crystallize it, that's a self-assembly, right? Crystals are, you can irradiate them, you can do things, and they're just chemically tougher than the naked molecules out in solution. So it can be a self-assembly or assembly with another molecule or on a mineral, anything. Any kind of assembled molecule is resistant to chemical assault, is one of the ways to say it. And there's so many ways that things can assemble.
Right. So it sounds like there's some consensus as to that clearly we need polypeptides and we need polynucleotides, but we're not really quite sure how it went incrementally in terms of which appeared first and helped catalyze the other. But all of this is to say that we're far from clueless.
We're not clueless. No, we are not at all clueless.
Well, that sounds pretty clear, James. We are not clueless. Is he lying? Is he corrupt? How are you going to expose these lies, James? You said you would, no matter who it is or what they say.
Whoever goes on his channel, their work will be exposed.
Okay, that should be fun for you. Jumping now to his third prompt, James again draws some molecules on the board for absolutely no reason, and decides to write clueless next to polysaccharides before we even discuss them.
You don't have enzymes because you couldn't make them here. You couldn't make them there. No enzymes. You're lost. We already established you don't have enzymes. There's no enzymes yet on the prebiotic Earth. You couldn't make them. You're clueless on that.
Okay, time is up.
All of this because he knows full well that the answer to this question is enzymes. One word, and his entire prompt is rendered meaningless. As I've stated multiple times in my content, when James complains about this topic, he is ignoring the very reasonable proposal that enzymes can have come about to then produce biologically relevant disaccharides and polysaccharides prior to the emergence of life, just like other enzymes do it today. These enzymes could be nucleic acids, they could be proteins, but James ignores this obvious solution and just tries to keep jumping back to the idea that we can't get those molecules prebiotically, even though we just spent about 20 minutes talking about how we totally can. I show how childish this is and press him on the idea that given nucleic acids and peptides, getting polysaccharides is not a problem.
Will you concede that this is a perfectly viable explanation for biologically relevant polysaccharides? Enzymes did it, just like they do today. Can you wrap your head around that, James?
Give me a minute to wrap my head around it.
Give you a minute to know what enzymes are and what they do?
Just give me
If enzymes exist, can we get biologically relevant polysaccharides? Yes or no?
James can't even admit that because it invalidates his entire talking point. Then, instead of formally conceding this, he covertly concedes it by then trying to complain about the enzyme that does this chemistry today, and implying that only that enzyme could ever have done this type of chemistry, which is idiotic.
Here is the enzyme that do this. This is the enzyme that does this. It is 98 kilodaltons. It's 20 to the 842. That's 10 to the 1094 possible scenarios. If you have anything more
is that the enzyme that does this
10
today,
to the 50th,
or is that the enzyme
you don't
that
have
did this
enough
4
time
billion years
in our
ago?
universe. In 14 billion years.
Wow, big numbers, guys.
Yeah, big numbers.
What's most telling about these exchanges is that James is so desperate to avoid admitting the validity of what I'm saying that he resorts to accusations of what I said in my content and when.
Will you concede that this is a perfectly viable explanation for biologically relevant polysaccharides?
You only came out with that in your second series. In your first video on me, you said these just keep hooking on the end.
You only said that in your second series, not in your first series. Well, it's totally false, as I've been trying to teach him this thing in all of my content. In fact, most of my slides were just screenshots from my existing content debunking him. But much more importantly, it's valid whether or not I had ever said it prior. This he said, she said game is an obvious deflection because he just can't let go of any of these talking points. He needs to write clueless next to all of his 5 prompts. In fact, he already wrote clueless before we even began talking about this, so he is totally unwilling to backpedal and admit that there are clear answers to his objections. He does not care about facts. He does not care about reality. He only cares about his performance for his flock. There is no better demonstration of this than right here. Look what he does when pressed. It's a fact that peptides of any length, even di- and tripeptides, can have catalytic activity. We don't need a protein with 400 residues to do chemistry. So can some enzyme, other than the one he showed, have done this chemistry prebiotically?
Is it possible that another enzyme that doesn't have this exact sequence could perform this chemistry? Yeah?
Well, let's take a look at that.
I mean, or you could just answer the question.
Let me tell you something. Let's take a look at that. This is a little molecule, right? This is a little 6-carbon molecule.
Sure.
You know how what it took to make this? It takes 11 enzymes, 4 of them unique, and 4 activators, and these 15 steps today to make it. You're telling me on an early Earth there was some enzyme that magically put this molecule together. This takes 14 enzymes.
You're talking about a monosaccharide?
This is...
No response. He just starts talking about 11 enzymes being necessary to make glucose while showing a slide about how to get ribose, a different sugar, as though modern biosynthesis of ribose is the only way to get ribose, despite the mountain of literature showing prebiotic syntheses of ribose, some of which he has literally discussed in his own content. It's insane. I call him out on this, and again the goalposts come undone.
Foremost makes sugars. Foremost reaction makes sugars. What are you talking about? You're talking about ribose?
Because they've never been able to separate those. They've never been able to use those sugars for anything.
What do you mean?
Because they're so contaminated. Name me one person that has one person that has made a stereo-controlled reaction to make glucose, stereo-controlled reaction to make glucose, and that could ever separate it from the mess that you get.
Why would they have to separate it?
Nobody.
Why would they have to separate it?
You have to separate it.
Why? You have to separate it in the lab because you need to characterize it because you're a chemist.
No,
Nature doesn't need to
take
do that.
it on to the next step.
How can you get this stereo-controlled? How can you separate individual sugars from a product mixture? You don't have to, James. Nature doesn't need to isolate and purify compounds for characterization by NMR to make sure it got what it wants. Nature isn't a chemist like you. Nature makes whatever it makes. This is what James will never understand, no matter how loud he shouts. Moving on to my third prompt, I decide to nail James on one of the topics he hopes I won't bring up, which is all the embarrassing claims he's made about homochirality. I finish my prompt, and the first thing James does, rather than say anything about science, is to accuse me of reading a precise script from my YouTube videos.
Here is a handy chart depicting all the possibilities, so there are lots of places for us to begin this discussion.
Okay, I just want you to understand what the man has just done, and he keeps doing, is he's reading exactly the script from his YouTube video. He cannot speak chemistry on the fly. He's reading the script from his YouTube video.
This is both false and irrelevant. I scripted my 2-minute prompts to get as much information in them as possible. Citing things I've said in my content he ignores. So the idea that it's some kind of repeated script that is conveniently exactly 2 minutes long is idiotic. And again, no matter when it was scripted or by whom or for what purpose, it doesn't matter. It's all factual information. He is now so obviously spinning his wheels, so let the pageantry begin.
Spoiled for choice, we know of too many ways that homochirality can have arisen to say for certain which one it was. Her own words, unquote. I got this from his YouTube video. Well, that's not what the title is. Let's read the title with me. Spoiled for choice, assessing phase behavior models for the evolution of homochirality.
Wow!
He said the title was one thing and it's a totally different thing. Now, he goes on. Let's look at the paper. Let's look at the paper. Now, she says,
He reads the title of Donna's paper emphatically and pretends it doesn't say what I said it does. Look at these pathetic slides he shows but doesn't read out loud. First, a block of tiny blue text in the middle of the slide that pretends I'm misrepresenting Donna without basis. Then he makes some claim about Chemistry World and that I claimed they were abysmal in their reporting? What? I dare anyone to find me saying anything like that. A ridiculous lie. He is fixating on the phrase phase behavior because he has never learned any of the chemistry I discussed here. Crystallization, co-crystallization, sublimation, and so forth. He is doubling down on his quote mining of Donna, where he pretended something she said about parity violation represented the entire field. He is doubling down on the quote mine after I just exposed the quote mine. That's how profoundly dishonest he is. I nail him on his dishonesty, I nail him on his gish galloping, and he just fumes silently as we finish the section. Then comes the third time that the moderator jumps in for no reason, this time to try and defend Jim's incorrect usage of homochirality, which I can only assume he was primed to do.
Just a quick comment about homochirality and enantiomerically pure. They started as different terms, but chemical technology and not technology, but chemical nomenclature changes all the time, and there's been a blending now. People using homochirality when they mean enantiomerically pure, and vice versa. So.
I've never heard anyone say homochiral glucose and have that mean something.
So basically, sometimes people start using words incorrectly, so it's okay that James uses this word incorrectly. He compares it to people using stereoselectivity and stereospecificity incorrectly as a justification that other words are sometimes used incorrectly, and that's okay.
Accurate.
And we used to talk about stereospecific reactions and stereoselective reactions, and those have become blended now.
Mm-hmm.
They have very
those also mean different things.
Firm definitions, but they're unfortunately used interchangeably, and that happens with. That's already happened.
That's just an error, though, because they do have very specific definitions.
But organic chemistry is a language, and languages change. Nomenclature changes as well over time. So
yeah, but specificity and selectivity mean different things. So I think we should push back on people.
Stereoselectivity and stereospecificity.
Yeah, or
okay,
regiospecificity.
Can we get on, because we got to...
Yeah, sure.
I point out that people using words incorrectly doesn't make their incorrect usage accurate. I have a video on the differences between these terms if you're curious. To be clear, it doesn't matter that much that James was using the word incorrectly. It's just about the hypocrisy. James is the best chemist on earth and Dave is a dumb YouTuber, right? So why am I teaching him the definitions of terminology in his field? It makes you wonder. Okay, on to Jim's fourth prompt, which is entirely pseudoscience. Specified information doesn't mean anything. It was coined by Bill Dembski of the Discovery Institute, and it is creationist propaganda. Google the term, and the first hit will be specified complexity, which is described as a creationist argument introduced by William Dembski to promote the pseudoscience of intelligent design. Any code needs a mind to create that code, the usual bullshit. The DI clearly coached him on this, so let's watch it backfire in his face.
Specified information. We have to have some information for the coding in a cell. Here is Lee Cronin, your favorite counselor on Origin of Life. Here's what he says. He says, because there's some contingent information embodied outside the genome. He goes through and he says how people have claimed to have made cells. This is where he's explaining what he means by Origin of Life research is a scam. It is a scam. I say they're clueless. He says scam.
As you can see, he is now describing synthetic biology, which somewhat overlaps with, but is not actually part of Origin of Life research. And then he continues to quote mine Lee Cronin. At any rate, I immediately cut through his bullshit and told him that the sequence of nucleotides in a nucleic acid is the information. That's it.
So when you take extant life and strip things away, that is not directly addressing the origin of life. So you're taking a completely different field. Information is in nucleic acids and peptides.
No, that is like that.
Nucleic acids don't convey information? Are you joking?
He denies it. The sequence of nucleotides is only Shannon information, he claims. Then some more gibberish.
There is no information there to give you the prescription you need.
What do you mean, no information?
Because what I'm telling you is it has what is called Shannon information. It's information from randomness, which is not specified.
The sequence of monomers
you need specified information. This man is seeing it. Even Benner. You want to quote what Benner says about this?
James knows he has absolutely nowhere to go here, so he just resorts to putting the Lee Cronin tweet up again and raising his volume.
And you're pretending that Lee Cronin is going, Origin of Life research is stupid. All of my work is stupid. Why would you think anyone would believe that? This
is here he is. He wrote it. Here he puts up this tweet. Origin of Life research is a scam.
How pathetic. Of course, I point out how unbelievably dishonest and idiotic this is, yet again, and his response is to desperately run to the board to write out clueless, because the pageantry is all he has left.
Yes, Lee Cronin is pretending all of his work and that of all of his colleagues is meaningless.
He's your favorite advisor.
James.
He's your man. Over and over again. You gave him half of an entire video, Lee Cronin.
If I write not clueless, does that win?
Then he says my understanding is shallow, everything is hype. He's like a malfunctioning robot at this point.
The reason you think these guys have everything is because you're very shallow in your understanding. You believe this nonsense that they put in the title. It said it in the title, so it has to be. I told you the titles are hyped. They are hyped.
Since James has no idea how to talk about biological information, there was no meaningful exchange here, but since people are curious about this, let's talk about it for a moment. Biopolymers contain information because of the variability of their components. 4 nucleotide bases for RNA, for example, which can be likened to an alphabet. Biological information is defined as the difference between the maximum entropy and the actual entropy of a system, and a theory for the origin of life has to explain how this information can arise from random events and then persist. For it to persist, it has to harness energy from the system and replicate before it decomposes. This replication requires catalytic function, and the first replicators were likely pretty long polymers to achieve this. So can they have arisen randomly? Plenty of people have done the math here, and the DI does nothing but distort the numbers for shock value. But to pretend that it is impossible without a divine mind dialing in the code is profoundly unscientific, especially given the astronomical number of opportunities over millions of years and on the picosecond timescale of chemical reactions. I will expand on this in future content and also link to some literature below. Moving on to my final prompt, this is where I force James to deal with the existence of systems chemistry, something he has never, ever covered in any of his content for even a single second, despite it being more or less the centerpiece of origin of life research, as it studies how novel functions arise from sets of interacting molecules. This is where evolutionary principles emerge from the chemical world, which means this is how life began. I cruise through my prompt, closing with a fairly profound statement as to why James ignores this entire field, and a heckler promptly shouts, "Good reading," which James reasserts himself.
Because self-replicating molecules that evolve by natural selection, that sounds just a little too relevant to the origin of life, now doesn't it?
Good reading. Yeah, tremendous reading skills. I'm telling you, he's reading from his videos. You don't have to watch his videos. He just read it. The man cannot speak.
I guess the research isn't real because I wrote
He has people writing this text for him, and he comes in here.
I guess research isn't real because Dave wrote words and read them. So let me answer your question.
This is what creationists do. They resort to pretending that all of this research isn't real just because I scripted my brief presentation of it to be time efficient. So I mocked them for it, which some people didn't like. But to those people I say this: pay close attention and watch what James immediately does. Remember, the topic is systems chemistry, ribozymes, autocatalysis. That's the topic. It's my prompt. I chose the topic. It's systems chemistry. What are the first words out of his mouth?
You said, because I say, well, why don't you just take a dead cell and bring it back to life? Because at least everything is kind of there. And he says, and he says, but it actually has been done.
Reanimation of dead cells, which has literally nothing to do with the topic. Gish Gallop. He did this because in one of my debunks, I mocked a conversation he had with Stephen Meyer, where they totally fumble the concept of cell death to try and support the idea of a life essence bestowed by their god. This had nothing to do with the origin of life, but was just showing how dumb Tour and Meyer are when they try to discuss biology, and they must have been fuming about it. At any rate, he was gish galloping, so I called him out for it. Repeatedly.
James, why are you jumping to a completely different topic? We're talking about systems
chemistry. No, because we're talking about cells. We're talking about bringing this back to life. This man stood there and said that they took dead cells and they brought them back to life.
And he's talking about something completely unrelated. Do you wonder why? Because he cannot address this research. Because he's talking about something totally different. He is a gish galloper, like Kent Hovind. Hey, look over here. We don't want to talk about this research.
You have to take that and apply it.
He just keeps rambling about dead cells, which again has absolutely nothing to do with the topic I brought up. So I rein the charlatan in yet again, and I ask him if the research I am showing does the thing that it says it does. What does he say?
Totally misinterpreted that article, like all your articles.
But back to what I was talking about, do you agree that this research shows replicators that evolve by natural selection? Because it does.
No.
Do you? No. Oh, okay. So Gerald Joyce is a fraud. You're calling Gerald Joyce a fraud right now? You should be careful right now.
No, because he doesn't.
No, the paper doesn't do what it says it does. Then, I missed this during the debate, but he starts talking about DNA instead of RNA, which is hilarious.
Copy DNA. How much of the DNA did he copy? You read the paper, I read the...
Fully self-replicating. Fully self-replicating.
No, he did not fully self-replicate it. There's not more than 10... Show me. You got the paper there. No, show it.
I'll save you the agony of reliving this entire exchange, but it's just James insisting over and over that none of these ribozymes fully self-replicated, even though they all describe exponential amplification, which is totally impossible and meaningless if they were not fully self-replicating.
It is not fully replicated. If it was fully replicated, he would have said fully replicated. It is not.
20-fold amplification.
They take a long bit and they duplicate this much of it.
James, how would it retain catalytic activity?
Even if they could duplicate the whole thing, you're
James
still
is
stuck
baselessly denying a body of work and pretending that no one will notice and pretending that and hoping you'll just believe him.
He just keeps denying reality. I land on this paper, he asks how much, I tell him fully self-replicating, and he continues denying it. Here it is, 20-fold amplification. I showed him this data in the debate. The concentration of the ribozyme increased by a factor of 20. This requires many rounds of self-replication. If it was only able to replicate 10% of itself, like he claims, it could not undergo even a second round of replication. A child could understand this, but James is too busy posturing for his fans to admit that he's wrong. I rub that in his face aggressively and repeatedly. He subconsciously realizes he's toast, so what does he do?
Where did the
pretending that you, and hoping you'll
come
just
from?
believe him.
But where does the RNA come from? You can't get RNA. Goalpost shifting yet again. Of course, this ribozyme was constructed by mutagenesis and selection. It didn't emerge randomly, but that's not the point. The study shows that RNA strands can multiply exponentially, exhibiting Darwinian evolution and niche partitioning in the absence of life, something James has repeatedly claimed is impossible. So it was really fun rubbing this research in his face. The desperation of this pageantry reaches its zenith, where everyone in the audience can see that he is totally unable to admit this research exists, so he decides to just write clueless in all caps on the board, like a little toddler insisting that he won at checkers after he lost.
Where did it come from? You couldn't make it. And you can't assemble a cell and you can't bring one back to life.
Switch to something else, right? Switch to something else. Don't look. Don't look at this research. Don't look at fully self-replicating molecules. I guess if I write clueless a bunch of times, I won the debate, right?
And that led to me finally picking up some chalk to write the only thing I ever needed to write, the precise mirror of Jim's dumb stunt, that we are not clueless.
Should I write not clueless? James, I've showed you prebiotically plausible routes to all of those molecules.
All of these you did not show. I asked you specific chemistry. All you can do is write one word. You showed us no chemistry because you understand zero. You understand none of it.
Clueless.
Debate over. I rub his ideological motivations right in his smug face as the cherry on top, and he completely folds.
Gentlemen,
you cannot address the research because you don't want it to be true, and we all know
I'm
why.
glad you have mind reading. In addition to all your talents, you can mind read now.
To those who want to pretend I just can't understand this autocatalysis research, let's consult an expert. One of the ribozyme papers I showed was authored by James Attwater while he was working in the Phil Holliger lab at Cambridge, who is now continuing to do this type of work in his own lab at UCL London.
Is there anything you can tell us in terms of just like the history of what we've been doing with ribozymes, like early experiments, how we started figuring out this aspect of autocatalysis, things like that with ribozymes?
Yes, so the discovery of ribozymes about 40 years ago or so really just unlocked this mental switch in a lot of scientists. They suddenly realized that a molecule that encodes information could also catalyze reactions. Right. And this opens the door to a potential simpler biology that's based on a single biopolymer of RNA. And over the time since then, there's been a massive research effort to try and understand what RNA is capable of catalyzing. Biology has a few RNA catalysts, but they are far between, and there's only a couple of any particular note, such as the one that makes proteins.
Right.
There's none of these other whole array of activities that you would need to support a primordial biology that's based on RNA. And so we want to find out what there is, what RNA is capable of. Mm-hmm. And to do this, we have to resort to molecular evolution, where we take a library of quadrillions of random RNA molecules and try and fish out those very, very rare sequences which fold up into a specific shape to catalyze a desired reaction. Mm-hmm. And so using this sort of fishing technology, we can get a sense of what RNA is capable of. Mm-hmm. And via the logic that the laws of chemistry have remained unchanged for 4 billion years, the catalytic capacity of RNA also in theory is going to be the same now as it was 4 billion years ago.
Right.
So we can do experiments in the lab today and get an idea of what might have happened on the primordial Earth.
And so at some point we stumbled upon ribozymes that were autocatalytic, that were self-replicating. Is that the case?
Yeah, this is a really, really dedicated research effort, because you can have a biology based on a single biopolymer, but you can go even simpler than that and try and get a biology based on a single molecule. And this single molecule is the idea of an RNA that copies RNA, including itself, a self-replicating RNA. If you have such an RNA, then you could feed it building blocks, and it would make lots of copies of itself. And that's sort of just kickstarting this exponential process and potentially evolution.
So my understanding is that that was Gerald Joyce in the very early first couple of years of this century. Is that the first time that was achieved?
So there's self-replicating and there's self-replicating, and it depends on the context. So the first kind of self-replication is typified by this ribozyme that is a cross-catalytic ligase, where you have two parts of the ribozyme, and an intact ribozyme will join those together into a new intact form of the ribozyme. And with this system, you can just see in the test tube that copies of this RNA grow exponentially over and over again, and that is self-replication in the context of providing two sort of parts of this ribozyme. But there's been a broader effort, I'd say,
that's
towards
the ligation. That's the ligation mechanism. Yes.
Exactly, yes. When you're making a single bond and you've made a new copy of the molecule that's active. But there's been a much broader push towards developing a different form of self-replication, where you build a ribozyme from the smallest possible building blocks, even down to single nucleotide letters. And there's been contributions to this from the Joyce Laboratory, and they've probably got the fastest one out there at the moment, but from other groups as well, including Phil Holliger's. And this would allow you to build it from short building blocks. This means you can vary the sequence. You can make mistakes, some of which will be bad, but maybe some of these will be good and give you a new or improved activity.
A Darwinian principle.
Exactly. And you have this sort of open-ended capacity to develop new sequences, new activities, and essentially new biology. And that needs so you'd have to use small building blocks for that. Large building blocks, you're fixed in sequence.
So
the other reason
with this more of a polymerase activity, but we have demonstrated fully self-replicating ribozymes with this mechanism as well.
It's sort of, I'd say, on the cusp. On a logarithmic scale, we are now pretty close. So there are ribozymes, polymerase ribozymes, which can use monomers to copy sort of up to half of their sequence length. Our ribozyme, which uses three-letter building blocks called triplets. This can build a full copy of its catalytic subunit. It can copy the complementary strand of that subunit, which would be the template used to direct it. And in that case, the yield is the issue, right? We put in more ribozyme than we get out. So it has not yet reached ignition, where we can feed in building blocks, and these polymerase ribozymes will grow and grow and grow. But in terms of the actual activity that's there, it's getting close, right? And the idea of a self-replicating ribozyme is there's a lot of confidence that this will be in our hands very shortly, because and it's not just about the raw rates. There's a whole lot of other complex tasks that encompass self-replication using this polymerase method. You need a ribozyme that sort of recognizes a template, treats it generally, doesn't get stuck in one place, brings in building blocks, make sure it's the right building block, adds it to a growing strand of RNA, doesn't get mucked up by the template that it's using folding up into a shape that blocks it. And then finally, once it's completed synthesis of this strand, you now have a duplex of RNA. You need to separate the two strands so that each strand can act as a template in a new cycle of exponential growth. So there's a lot under the hood of the idea of a self-replicating molecule. And in recent years, there's been a lot of progress on a number of these activities, and it's sort of all coming together. in our hands in particular, we've been able to use this ribozyme to exponentially copy other RNA molecules in a single test tube, including a fragment to itself. And we think that if we had an increase in activity of, say, 3 to 4-fold, then we'd be knocking on the door of getting more RNA out than we put in.
Right. Not necessarily autocatalytic, but replicating another template strand.
It's always going to be replicating a different template. A molecule can't sort of act on itself because it's folded up into its own shape.
But different sequences.
Yeah, at the moment it can copy other sequences exponentially. It can copy parts of itself exponentially. But we need it to be able to copy all of itself, and it's looking a bit more like a numbers game now than it once was. Previously, there were these major blocks towards achieving this self-replication activity, and they've been knocked down one after the other over the past few years. So there's real excitement about what these systems could do.
Yeah, no, it does seem like systems chemistry is really taking off in the past decade or even the past few years. What are the implications for prebiotic chemistry in terms of ribozymes perhaps working together with peptides and peptides starting to have catalytic activity? I have a vague understanding of it, but perhaps for the viewers, in a few sentences, just sort of describing what it might have looked like in terms of when these autocatalytic sets first emerged, how that would then slowly over a lot of time eventually produce a protocell.
Well, yes. So the whole goal of this research is to get an idea of what the simplest possible replicator is. Our results in particular suggest that it uses 3-letter building blocks, because these by themselves bind to templates, unfold strands, and fulfill a lot of these jobs, shifting the burden of complexity off the replicator and onto the substrates. Another thing we've been looking at, and others, is a ribozyme activity in a different environment outside of cells, because it works much better in, say, a frozen environment at -7 degrees than it does inside a cell. And this suggests we might be able to make life easier for a ribozyme if it's outside of a cell. At some point, it's going to get into a cell, invade that habitat of protocells, and their benefit from the encapsulation to be able to generate its own metabolism. But just the very first replicators, the research is suggesting they looked quite a lot different from the original ideas that were around 10, 20, 30 years ago. When we bring in peptides, that is a really interesting question. At the moment, there isn't a huge amount of research, a huge amount of understanding of how peptides and ribozymes could have worked together. One thing we noticed with a polymerase ribozyme was that its activity was boosted by a short peptide that helps it to stick to the target template it was copying. And actually, really interestingly, some peptides from the core of the ribosome, which is in today's biology a ribozyme that makes proteins, for some of those peptides in the core also boosted the activity of these artificial RNA polymerase ribozymes. So I think there's room for early peptides to help, but we're really going to get this big shift once you invent peptides whose synthesis can be coded and directed by an RNA molecule. To say then the peptides can start to evolve.
Yeah, that's sort of a revelation that I had, because once you understand that even small peptides, even dipeptides and tripeptides have catalytic activity, then doesn't that sort of open up a world or open up a pathway where you can have this very slow sequential, like you don't need a ribozyme that is catalyzing a 200 residue long peptide to do some other catalytic activity. It could have been a very slow sequential growth of, it's very small peptides that then do some function, and just like a really iterative thing over millions of years, potentially.
Yeah. So I would never say it would necessarily take millions of years. When evolution invents things, it can happen all of a sudden. But yes, it's going to be possibly small steps. You're going to have these abundant di and tripeptides around in the environment when you've got condensation chemistry and amino acids, or the primordial derivatives thereof. And these things are going to be around. And so if RNA is evolving in their presence, it's quite likely that they may be recruited if they provide a selective benefit. And the thing about peptides is the building blocks are extremely, quite small compared to the building blocks of RNA. RNA is a very sort of, RNA monomer building blocks are very bulky.
Yeah.
They don't have much flexibility. They don't have much catalytic, many catalytic moieties, whereas amino acids are small, flexible, and have these different chemical groups that can provide something beyond the RNA. And so an RNA, a ribozyme that can recruit these and make them form part of its structure, might find its catalytic potential greatly enhanced. And this is something that doesn't need to be planned or anything. This will happen if the RNA is evolving in the presence of diamine peptides. Now, we don't know what exactly that would look like. At the moment, it's difficult to do that sort of experiment and identify what's interacting with it. Things get quite messy, and scientists don't like messy because it's difficult to analyze and characterize. But the primordial environment is going to be messy, and so I believe you'd have these processes taking place where ribozymes not only recruit peptides but any other organic or even inorganic molecules or surfaces around in the environment to get the job done.
Yeah, so certainly we do not have crystal clarity on the precise mechanisms that would have led to a protocell, but I think most in this field would agree we are far from clueless as to how it would have happened, right?
Yes, I'd say that we have a strong sense of what works and a strong sense of what we're looking for and the kinds of things that the kinds of solutions that might be around. We don't know what the exact solutions are.
Right.
But year on year, we're getting sort of better and better idea of what makes things work better, and trying to really get the simplest possible, the idea of the simplest possible replicator, because that is going to be the replicator that is most likely to emerge from prebiotic chemistry, systems chemistry, and the generation of RNA via non-enzymatic means. At some point, the chemical has to be bridged with the biological.
Right.
And if that bridged gap is short enough, then you can work out whether, based on the size of the gap, whether life is impossible or improbable or inevitable even.
Or inevitable even, yeah. Yeah, that nice clean spectrum from chemical to biological.
Yeah, that's the dream, right?
Very cool. Well, that clarifies a bit for me. Thanks so much for talking.
No problem.
Some elucidating words from an expert in the field. What are you going to do, James? Expose Attwater's research as a scam?
Whoever goes on his channel, their work will be exposed.
Why not bring in one more expert for good measure? Kepa Ruiz-Mirazo wrote this phenomenal review of prebiotic systems chemistry, which is linked below for anyone interested in reading. He has some fascinating perspectives about models other than RNA world, such as metabolism first, which can be integrated to deliver a broader perspective.
So, is systems chemistry your primary area of research?
Yeah, we could say that, because I'm a protocell. So I since my PhD, which I am a guy from complex systems, right? I'm a physicist who has approached the complex. I did a PhD in complex systems when the Santa Fe Institute and all that, like in the 90s, where that was hot, right? And Stuart Kaufman and all these guys. So I did my PhD there, and I was already at that time claiming that we needed a systems approach, both to biology and to origins of life. So when that happened at the turn of the century, I was just, taking the board and surfing the wave that, because I already had been kind of saying that kind of thing before the whole thing started. But there are quite a few people in the world now putting this perspective on the table, and actually, for example, there are Ram Krishnamurthy, there is this John Sutherland, although John Sutherland is a bit like an enemy of everyone these days, is creating more enemies than there is Marcus Ralser, there is Joseph Moran. There are quite a few people that are showing that you can run metabolic pathways without enzymes, which was something that Orgel said in the good old days, when Orgel was kind of claiming that we had to do we had to go, that the path was the RNA world, and replicating molecules and all that. He was actually acknowledging that if there was ways to run metabolism without enzymes, that would be very good news for the field. But he was very skeptical about that. And but now, I mean, now he's not any longer with us. But now we are showing that that path could be plausible, and that's where I have all my expectations of people working also on protocells, compartments, and coupling chemistry with compartments. And the idea here is that you need to start with some kind of diversity of components, so that it's not like in the old days. It was like fighting for which molecule came first and what type of process came first. And now there is an idea that you have to combine different types of chemical precursors, right? Rather than going for nucleotides or going for proteins or going for just like and building a theoretical framework in which you defend, you justify why that molecule had to come first. Now, probably there were precursors of a diversity of functional molecules that now are super complex and have functionalities that are specific and all that. We should think like we should have a way of thinking should be biological, but implementing things chemically. So the rise of systems biology and systems chemistry a few years later is just the right way to kind of face the problem. But we need a few breakthroughs. The young generation are paying attention to this, and I'm hoping that they will really,
So essentially, like some of this recent work we're talking about, not necessarily identifying a singular pathway, like with RNA world and needing to get ribozymes. You're saying that there's just a lot of different avenues that possibly could have been working in tandem, like people who are working with metabolism first. It's an opportunity to have vesicles that are generating some kind of energy currency that could have then aided in the production of ribozymes or peptides and things like that. So there's just so many ways that we're investigating.
There are many ways, but there are problems that we have to face, which is, for example, and they were not faced. This is like Robert Shapiro and these guys were criticizing under the influence of molecular biology and this idea that we had the secret of life, which was DNA, and we could, just fix our attention on biopolymers. And if we had a chemical shortcut to biopolymers, then we would get this, we would find the
but we're just it sounds like people are working on RNA world. It sounds like you're working on some of these alternative models, and that just perhaps there's some truth in many of them, and that they work in tandem to get us to the protocell.
Sure, because what we are trying to understand is how those pieces work. The thing is that the most difficult thing is integration, right? And that's where we are finding it like a stumbling block is the integration and non-equilibrium, analyzing non-equilibrium. So typically organic chemists, what they do is they have an experiment, and the way they analyze things is when things get to equilibrium, right? And there is when they can say, okay, I'm having this mechanism that is these molecules interacting with this one to give this one, and I analyze the end result, which is an equilibrium mixture. So you start these guys that are doing now very interesting experiments to show that metabolic pathways could be run without enzymes, which is a very important proof of principle for the field. They're running it like you start with a mixture and you analyze the equilibrium mixture. So you start with a mixture, not with just one type of component, and you see that from precursors you can actually get a nice suite of things, but the analysis is in equilibrium conditions typically. We need to develop new analytical tools and systems where you can analyze, because life is made of molecules, but life is a dynamic organization of those molecules, right? And that's the hard bit. When you have dynamics, recurrent dynamics, in which you have a metabolism that is providing the building blocks, and then those building blocks construct molecules that constrain the metabolism and all that is super dynamic and is very difficult to catch and to catch and analyze properly. That's the huge challenge. Nick Lane, other people are saying that it's very important to start with non-equilibrium and energy is super important. We've been saying that even before Nick Lane, when I'm old, when we were claiming that energetics is fundamental because actually is what drives the whole thing. And so non-equilibrium conditions, being able to analyze things dynamically and heterogeneous environments are our kind of challenges. And once we get people, motivated enough to address those challenges, I think we're going to see a few breakthroughs that, will keep me busy until retirement, I hope, and happy about what's going on. It was very boring. It was very boring, to be honest, until the turn of the century. Now it's becoming much more exciting.
Yes, going on. So, I mean, definitely we've identified the primary challenges, but we certainly wouldn't say we're clueless on this front, would we?
We are not clueless because there are so many things, so many things that we know. Approaches.
Bottom up, I think even before we get to the complex realm of systems chemistry, would you say that we have prebiotically plausible pathways to get at least the building blocks?
Sure. Yeah. There's quite a bit of debate about what is the chemistry underlying that. For example, John Sutherland would say that you need hydrogen cyanide chemistry to get there. It's super reactive and gives you quite a few in 2015 already. So Sutherland not only made a breakthrough in how you could approach the synthesis of RNA nucleosides, right, from a different perspective, it's a systems perspective. John Sutherland's perspective was a systems perspective, like a molecular systems perspective, in the sense that he was analyzing the different components of an RNA nucleoside and how you could get there from precursors. So it was a kind of applying the same idea of having precursors, but not of a whole cell, like in a protocell, but more of a given molecule, like the RNA nucleoside, right? And he managed to find a pathway through which you could synthesize RNA without having the ribose, the base, and the phosphate like already made, but the precursors of that, but later on in 2015, he also made from hydrogen cyanide. He also made a kind of a very interesting advance in say how much you can get from hydrogen cyanide. But the problem is the hydrogen cyanide chemistry is very different from it's very rich, and it can give some building blocks, but it's completely out of biochemistry, completely out. Then there are other people like Joseph Moran in Strasbourg. I think Joseph Moran in Strasbourg is doing the kind of the other extreme kind of approach, in which he's taking very strictly biochemistry, and he's analyzing biochemical pathways, getting rid of the enzymes, and pushing with all his knowledge. He knows a lot about, chemical mechanisms that could be driving those reactions in the presence of other catalysts, like inorganic compounds and stuff like that.
Things like that.
Surface, whatever, and alternatives to enzymes. And with that knowledge that these people have on chemical mechanisms, they're starting to show that there is kind of some drive. So those biochemical pathways, metabolic pathways, the extant metabolic pathways, have some potential to be run without enzymes. Ralser, for example, is showing that there are, even in biology, there are some reactions that take place without enzymes as well within biology, right? And so there's this shade metabolism that he talks about.
Uh-oh, it looks like you have another researcher to expose, James. This list is getting pretty long for you, but you promised.
Whoever goes on his channel, their work will be exposed.
Yeah, good luck with that. Lastly, let's check in with Loren Dean Williams one more time, as he had some input on systems chemistry, since that's his field.
different scientists have different ideas. We sort of favor a model of chemical evolution, and evolution is really not something that chemists have we don't really know what chemical evolution is. If you talk about a chemist, they don't think about evolution.
Right. A traditional synthetic chemist, that is to say, is not familiar with these concepts.
Yes, and people who really understand evolution really are not familiar with chemistry.
From a biological perspective, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a tricky middle ground, yeah.
But so I think one of the things we do that is that is unique, is we try to really incorporate evolutionary principles into chemistry. We actually believe, for example, we call one wet-dry cycle is a generation. Mm-hmm. And we call the chemicals that go from one cycle to the next are inherited. Basically all the formalisms that you use to talk about biological evolution, we use in chemistry.
Yes, Darwinian verbiage. I mean, now once I started looking at Gerald Joyce's work and talking about natural selection with these ribozymes, I mean, it just completely blew my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible, actually, that evolution is. I mean, evolution applies to chemistry, but chemists have not. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit as far as I'm concerned, because chemists in general have not sort of considered evolution as part of chemical sciences.
Mm-hmm. At least until this field in the past years.
Yeah, but even now, I have all kinds of organic chemists in my department. They have no idea what I'm talking about.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's fairly niche. Yeah.
Exactly.
Impenetrable, especially to those who don't want to understand it.
The idea in an evolutionary model that you have to have one thing happening before another, that's really not part of evolution.
It's not a sequence. Yeah.
Right. So we think the earliest metabolism was wet-dry cycling, just water. And that's metabolism. And that just goes on the surface of the earth. No matter what. So
that's catabolism by definition.
Right. Yeah. And most things in biology are made by condensation, dehydration. So that's the chemistry of biology, is wet-dry cycling. Mm-hmm. So, and that just on the surface of the earth with a rich organic inventory, just and everything happened together. You don't. This is my model. There's a lot of people who will argue with me on this, but my model is it's an evolutionary model, and there's no chickens and eggs. Everything kind of came together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think almost inevitably it has to be some different pieces, evolving in tandem. But I guess time will tell.
Time will tell.
Quite enlightening yet again. To wrap things up, let's get to the Q&A. There were some really great moments in here, as most of the questions were critical of James, since none of his science-illiterate fans are able to formulate a coherent question. Here is one where James is asked why he was so obsessed specifically with the 2 amino acids he drew on the board.
Why are you assuming that lysine and arginine and all 20 amino acids were there from the very first, the origin of life? Could you just justify that assumption for us? Why couldn't you have life from just some of the amino acids that later on...
30 seconds.
Okay.
So my contest on the amino acid claims was he kept saying amino acids are simple to make in water. That's what he said in his series.
Nope. I will give him the benefit of the doubt and assume he meant peptides, not amino acids, because prebiotic amino acid synthesis is not under dispute. In my first video for laypeople, I mentioned that we know how to get peptides in water. I did not specify any reagents or mechanisms because it was for laypeople.
But then, when challenged on that, he came out later and he said, when activated. When you activate them, they go from being zwitterionic to being non-zwitterionic. This is what I was getting at. So somebody coached him on this. Tour must be right on activation.
Yeah, chemical activators are used to get prebiotic peptide synthesis. James whined for references showing this, and I gave him a bunch of them. Of course there are activators, and they are all prebiotic. There is literally zero reason for him to object to this. He's wrong. He's been proven wrong. He just says the word zwitterion to pretend he knows what he's talking about. Nobody coached me on this. I'm just not ignorant and know how to read papers. And even if someone had fed me everything I have ever said on this topic, it wouldn't be any less correct. This is desperate damage control.
Now, to your next question. Could there have been life with half of the amino acids? We have no idea. Even if I gave you half of the amino acids, now what? Now what? Let me tell you, because if you have 100 amino acids, the chances of getting anything with prescribed information is say you have half of them, is 10 to the 100th. Yes, it is. Now, the chances of that folding, a 100-mer, the chances of it folding are what? 10 to the 90.
He quickly pivots, knowing he is fumbling, and then doesn't actually answer the question. He just starts whining about prescribed information, which again isn't a thing, and then plays the big scary numbers game. Now here's one where James is pressed about the self-replicating ribozymes.
So I was just wondering, when it comes to self-replicating ribosomes, which we talked about in step number 5, and there was a concept of if it was 100% or 10% or 20%. And so my question for you is, how could we set up an experiment to tell how much of a ribosome actually self-replicates, and so we can measure if it's 10 or 100, for example?
It's all been measured. These experiments have all been done. They will say they will make 7%. It's always less than 10.
We already showed how this is a lie, so there's no need to get into that again, but notice how James just desperately changes the topic to yet a different lie about how we can't get nucleic acids in the first place.
So what? Now how did you get this ribozyme? The first ribozyme, you have this 2-5 problem. You can't make the ribozyme, you can't do a duplication until you make one. And so here we have it. We can't make the first one. I'm just asking you for the first one. That's all.
Quick response.
Not done. Clueless.
The first fully self-replicating ribozyme was done in 2002 by Gerald Joyce. This is not new chemistry.
It's not true.
Doubly pathetic. Here's a particularly funny one where James is called out for claiming that he would treat any of his graduate students the way he treats me.
Dr. Tor, you spoke of making the charitable choice to treat your interlocutor as you would any grad student. Considering the nature of your disagreement and the form of it, in the broader context of the relationship between students and advisors at academic institutions, what is the nature of this graduate student-advisor relationship? And does this mean that you treat all of your graduate student mentees in the same manner as Mr. Farina?
I like that one.
I often confront my graduate students. Often. If you don't like the way I teach, you don't have to work in my group. But I train them very, very well. If they're going to speak nonsense, I will challenge them every time.
James, if you screeched at your students the way you did to me throughout that entire exchange, I'm pretty sure you'd get fired real fast. Here's a fun one where someone asked us to cite what we admired about each other's scientific careers. James launches immediately into a defense of how he's never called me stupid when he's done that countless times.
What is one thing that they admire about each other's scientific career?
Okay, let me start. This man has said multiple times that I have called him stupid. I have never called him stupid because I don't think he's stupid. I have said he's clueless on this topic. I have said he cannot read the scientific literature. That doesn't mean stupid. This man has become a musician, and then he went out, and in 2015, he started an educational site, which is huge. Stupid people can't do that. I admire him. This is an educational site, and I have never called him stupid because he's not stupid. He's not stupid. So I admire him for his educational site, and from what I understand, I'm not a musician. From what I understand, what people have said, he's an excellent musician. I admire him for that as well. His wife is here. He's a father. He has 2 children. I admire that a man can have a wife and 2 children and stay married and do these things these days. That is wonderful. That is wonderful.
So basically, James is shocked that my wife hasn't left me yet, and wow, Dave can play music. Wasn't this supposed to be about the science?
I never said Dave was stupid. I just said his content is a manure dump. I just said everything he says is wrong. I said he's clueless. I said he doesn't know chemistry. Although, again, who's used my content to pass his class? Anybody here? That's what I thought, James. He doesn't know chemistry, yet I'm helping your students. Isn't that interesting?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is how easy it is to get James to unravel. He refuses to admit that he was completely out of line in repeatedly proclaiming to his viewers that I don't understand chemistry, despite the fact that he is now pretending to praise me on my chemistry tutorials, which his students use to pass his class. So I explain chemistry better than he does, yet somehow I still don't know chemistry? The hypocrisy is off the charts. He is absolutely incapable of admitting that he was way out of line with all of the accusations he made in his content. Instead, he triples down with the same old crap.
Would you like to retract any of these statements?
Or
perhaps all of them?
On origin of life? No. Does Farina know chemistry? No.
I don't know chemistry.
You have
I
a
don't
script.
know chemistry.
Anybody can read a script. You saw it tonight. The man could not speak without a script. He has people write it. You could do it. You could do it. You could do it.
Yes, James, I'm someone who is actually trying to discuss the scientific literature on this topic, and 2 minutes per prompt is a very short amount of time to summarize an entire area of the field, so I plan what I'm going to say to be as efficient as possible. You know, instead of wasting time drawing amino acids on the chalkboard to impress people who know nothing about chemistry. He's in hot water, so he lashes out like a toddler. But the best question was about why James refuses to submit his critiques of this field to peer review.
Dr. Tor, given the significance of criticisms that you have on current research in the origin of life field, and given your prolific history of publishing, my question is, why aren't you publishing your critiques in reputable journals? Why are you...
All right.
Why are you denying the scientific community the benefit of your expertise? Why are you limiting your critiques to Discovery Institute publications and YouTube that the researchers you're talking about don't look at?
30 seconds is over.
Okay. First of all, it's very hard for me to publish a critique that is negative because it has to get through peer review. But that's not the main reason. There have been many critiques like this. So Bob Shapiro wrote critiques. Carnes Smith wrote a whole book on his critique of this. Clement Reichert has more recently written his critiques, all of them speaking the same types of things that I am saying. These guys continue on as if it was never written. I am not trying to reach the origin of life researchers. I am trying to reach the masses. And there is something called social media that is allowing me to reach the masses that never read the primary literature. I'm not trying to convince the origin of life researchers. I am trying to show the masses that there is another way of looking at this data. I am going after the people that do not read the scientific literature. That, to me, is what I want to do. And just so that you know, I'm not a YouTube guy like this guy is. I sit in my office and I work very hard at this.
You make a
lot of
YouTube videos.
I'll turn on my camera,
being a YouTube guy, buddy.
and my camera is on, and I forgot to have the sound turned on properly. It takes me hundreds of hours to do a series like that. I can certainly write articles in that amount of time.
The translation of this is, I can't publish my critiques because they're full of lies, so I'll lie to the public instead.
Of course, what I said is the truth of the matter. James doesn't want to have a dialogue with scientists because he doesn't want to learn anything. He wants to lie to the public instead. But look at how he frames this. James maintains that it's impossible for him to publish commentary that is critical of the field while simultaneously listing people who have published legitimate critiques.
There have been many critiques like this. So Bob Shapiro wrote critiques.
Bob Shapiro did it, so why can't you, James? Is it because Shapiro had legitimate critiques and you don't? Or is it because of some nefarious intent in the scientific community directed at you specifically? This is how delusional James has become. Watch this clip where he whines to some religious colleagues about how he can't get into the National Academy of Sciences because of a conspiracy against religious people.
I can tell you what's happened to me because of my stance based solely upon the science that's been written.
based on origin of life, there is a calculated attack on people that come against the science. You say, oh, our community wouldn't do that? Well, wake up. Your community does it. I signed a statement in 2001 that says that we are skeptical of random mutation and natural selection to account for the complexity of life. That came to me in a quick email. I signed that statement. I said, sure, I can agree with that. And as a result of that, I have been excluded from the National Academy of Science. This is the first time I'm saying it on record.
James, you spend most of your public outreach shitting all over the work of people who are in the Academy. Jack Shostak, Donna Blackman, Gerald Joyce, they're all in there, and many others. These are researchers doing incredible work in their field. When you run extensive anti-science campaigns and publicly accuse these people of fraudulence and then wonder why you're not asked to join their ranks, it's time to reflect a little, buddy. You are a blemish on the scientific community, not a leading member of it. Nothing demonstrates this more than the horrendous behavior you displayed in this debate. But it's okay, because what was that disclaimer you gave up top?
Unlike Mr. Farina, I have never been in a debate before. So if it appears that I am not a skilled debater, it's an accurate assessment.
Yeah, you can say that again. Of course, Jim's handlers over at the Discovery Institute have been in complete damage control since this train wreck performance from their prize horse. They put out over a dozen blog posts desperately trying to change the narrative, tweeting all of them 2 or even 3 times from each individual member's Twitter account, even going so far as to comb through my tweets to get more content, only to be completely ratioed every single time by intelligent people liking my responses far more than the likes acquired by the original post. For the most part, these are so mind-numbingly infantile that they aren't even worth discussing. It's the typical tripe about how dumb Farina is no match for the illustrious Tour, with no mention whatsoever of all his lies or erratic behavior or how badly I dunked on him. But one of them includes some very obvious fabricated comments to make it seem as though even atheists are condemning Dave's outrageous behavior. They are so blatantly scripted it's not even funny, including a fake biochemist who doesn't seem to know that lipids self-assemble into ordered structures in aqueous solution, so it must be magic. That doesn't smell funny at all. When I called them out on it, they issued a second layer of damage control to accuse me of being a conspiracy theorist. You can't make this stuff up, folks. Unfortunately for them, unlike the fake atheist detractors, as well as the numerous very obvious troll accounts copying and pasting their baseless slander, there are some real Christians who aren't fans of how James behaved, and they were quite vocal on my channel. It seems that James isn't helping the movement much after all. And what does Rice University think of all this? Well, we can't know what administrators are thinking, though I would imagine they aren't thrilled with the bad press. But the student newspaper called The Thresher was pretty clear about it. This article primarily references key moments where I elucidated his lies and petty tactics. Here, a student comments that Tour's behavior was atrocious and inappropriate for an academic environment. This is followed by a comment from myself, and then a comment from James where he apologized for shouting over Farina. Where was that apology exactly, James? I didn't get it. Seems like that should be directed my way, rather than an empty gesture towards a Rice student publication to try and save some face. Maybe it got lost in the mail, much like your original debate challenge that put you in this mess, So anyway, that's a summary of the most recent chapter in this long-running saga of James Tour digging the world's biggest hole for himself. He hosted a debate on his home turf, stacked rows of reserved seats with brainwashed hecklers, had a biased moderator in his pocket, and he still ended up looking like a buffoon. How much credibility do you have in the scientific community after all this, James?
0!
Yeah, that sounds about right. It remains to be seen whether James will keep his mouth shut on this topic for a while, but with his Discovery Institute handlers eager to maintain their flock, I imagine that hole's gonna keep getting deeper. See you next time.